Today we're going to talking about the digestive system, and just to let you know, I'm very close to finishing grading your exams. I was working on that this morning. I probably only have 2 or 3 questions left to grade, and so far I'm fairly impressed. I did notice that I forgot to take off some of the heart questions on there, so if there was a question about like the chordae tendineae or the parts of the plasma, I gave everyone full credit for those questions because that was my mistake and I forgot to take those off. In previous semesters, I usually make exam 2 bigger, but this year I made exam 1 bigger. It's all about all the same material, it's just when we cover it in which exam. So that is why that was there. So if you were worried about like the heart question because you didn't study it, I gave everybody full points for those questions. Okay, so we're talking about the digestive system. I did want to pull up the syllabus just to kind of give you a little sense of where we are at. So right now is March 15th. It is my sister's birthday today. And we are talking about the digestive system. You will have a My Wartburg assignment that's due on Friday, 3/19 at 11:55 p.m. over chapter 9. On Wednesday, we'll be doing a rat dissection. So this will be similar to the heart dissection that we did, except for we're going to be looking at the different organ systems, which is kind of where we shift our focus here the next couple of weeks. And then on Friday, we go over the respiratory system. So the digestive system is hopefully working in your body right now to digest your lunch, or if you're having a snack, those things. Respiratory system is happening all the time as well. You're breathing in oxygen and out carbon dioxide. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about those different organ systems this week, a little bit about the different maybe disorders or when there's a disease in that area of the organ system and some ways that we can prevent some of those diseases. Then next week, we'll be going over the reproductive system and then pregnancy and drugs. This seems to be a really familiar, or not really necessarily familiar, but definitely a popular topic in the class. We'll do a really cool lab called Alcohol and Pregnancy. And those will be chapters 17 and 18, and those will be next week. The week after that, March 29th, it's a little different. So if you check your calendar, March 29th is a Monday, and normally our exams are on a Friday, and I usually give us a review. But because we don't have class on Good Friday, which is April 2nd, if you're following along, April 2nd is the Friday of that week. We don't have class because of Good Friday, and then we also don't have class the April 5th because of Easter Monday. Those were the breaks that the college gave us this year. So we're going to have our exam on a Monday. So essentially, if you're looking on your calendar, yes, that exam is essentially 2 weeks from today. It's over chapters 9 and 10 and 17 and 18. So the next 2 weeks, those are the topics that we'll be doing. On Friday, March 26th, the second half of class we can dedicate to being a review. So that would be a time where you could bring your study guide questions and things like that, and we'll go over them on March 26th. You could also study over the weekend, ask me questions. We can set up a Zoom meeting if you want. And then March 29th will be your exam. Then you don't have class on that Friday, April 2nd, but we do have a lab still that week called How Do Vaccines Work, which will be kind of an interesting one. It's fun. We get to give a vaccine to a living organism, and I'll kind of leave it at that because that's a fun lab. And then you won't have class Easter Monday, April 5th, but when we come back, we will do a lab over bones and muscles. That one's pretty fun. We play bingo and learn different bones and muscles. Then on April 9th, we go over chapters 12 and 13, which are bones and muscles. And not to get overwhelmed or anything, this class is not anatomy and physiology, so you do not have to memorize any bones and muscles by any means, but kind of understanding, like if I say femur, kind of know where that's located. You can also look it up in your book because our exams are open book, open notes. So it's more of getting familiar with these terms, and maybe, you know, later in life or down the road, one of your friends breaks their leg and they break it in a certain spot, and you'll be able to know maybe what the doctor is telling you in that instance because you had a little bit of some understanding of those bones and muscles. Okay, if you want to follow along, we're reaching the end here. The last couple of chapters of April 12th, the week of April 12th, will be the nervous system and the endocrine system. Those are just a couple other organ systems that we'll be going over. And then that week we'll do a lab called This Is Your Brain on Drugs. Also a really popular lab in this class. We play games using drunk goggles, so that's kind of fun. And then on the week of the 19th, we go over psychoactive drugs. So we just dive deep into different types of drugs, what they do to your bodies, things like that. And our final exam is on April 23rd. So we're kind of looking at like about a month left of class here, a month and a week about. You have 2 exams left. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 labs left. So just wanted to give you a little bit of sense of where we are at. Does anybody have any questions about the setup? Okay, well, if you don't want to ask in the Zoom meeting, feel free to send me an email, or we can talk in person on Wednesday, whatever works best for you guys. We're going to go ahead and work on the digestive system. So you'll see a little shift in our PowerPoint slides. There's 2 reasons for this. One, when I first started teaching this class almost a year ago, we lost access to the other types of PowerPoint slides that we were doing. So you'll see it's a little bit different theme than the other ones. One of my comments on my evaluation, so you guys fill out an evaluation at the end of the year, was that they noticed that the PowerPoints were different. I just wanted to address that. They are different. I know they're different. Same material. They just look a little bit different. That's all. They still have points to ponder. They still have images. They may look a little bit less professional because they weren't made by a textbook company. Just wanted to put that out there. Okay, so we're working on the digestive system. When we go over different organ systems, remember, we don't really focus on memorizing this in this class. We work on understanding the importance, understanding structures, things like that. So when we go through this PowerPoint today, think to yourself, what are the structures and the functions of the digestive system? You probably think about the digestive system once in a while, right? If you have indigestion, or you have, you ate something really spicy and you can feel that in your stomach and things like that. But we're going to talk a little bit more in depth, a little bit more of the scientific focus of what the digestive system is doing for us. We're going to talk about carbohydrates, proteins, fat digestion, and how does that occur? Remember, those are the different macromolecules. So we are using some things from previous chapters. We're going to talk about what the 3 accessory organs are of the digestive system. When you see the word accessory, I think of like a tech accessory or a jewelry accessory, something that kind of goes along with the digestive system. The list of list common diseases of the stomach and their treatments. This will be a common theme when we go through the different organ systems. There'll be different diseases of each of the organ systems, and those diseases may have treatments or they may not. Also, some common diseases of the colon. You guys probably are familiar with people like getting their colons checked after a certain age. And we'll talk about why that's important as well. So let's talk about the main stages. So first, in the digestive system, this is probably the part that you think about the most, right? You're like, I'm so hungry, I just want to eat some food. And I hopefully, now that we're on Zoom and most of you have your cameras off, if you're having a snack, you're going through this food process right now. So that first step is ingestion, not digestion, ingestion. This is where the food enters the body. And for us, for humans, it's through the mouth. Other organisms can ingest whatever the food that they're having in different ways. Can anybody think of an organism, and you can unmic or put it in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable with. What's another organism that would ingest food, but not through a mouth?
Plant, maybe?
Plants, yeah. So they are getting their nutrients in a couple of different ways. Thanks, Anna. So nutrients in the soil. So there's minerals and vitamins in the soil that the plants will use. You could think of it like sunlight, where they use photosynthesis to break down electrons in order to get energy. So yeah, plants would be a great example of that. So for humans and mammals, specifically a lot of animals, we're ingesting that food through our mouth. We go through mechanical digestion. So that's with your teeth, okay? This is also why when maybe people who don't have teeth or young infants who don't have teeth, that mechanical digestion step is just not developed. That's why people maybe would have like a soft food diet. If you've ever had your wisdom teeth removed, you would know that during that time you usually have to eat a lot of soft liquids and things like that, where that mechanical digestion doesn't need to work. So that's another way. We do intake food, even though that mechanical digestion doesn't work. But in this example right here, let's talk about that mechanical digestion. So you've got food. Usually it's bigger than how big your esophagus is, so you need to digest that. So we start to kind of break it down with our teeth and also the saliva in our mouths. Maybe before you go eat a nice meal at a restaurant, you're starting to salivate when they bring out your food. That's your body starting the digestive process, even though you're not actually eating the food yet. There's enzymes and other things that help break down chemicals in your saliva that'll help break down that food. So the pieces of food, like it says, go through a chemical digestion. So this is enzymatic hydrolysis. And we know a little bit about hydrolysis. If you look at the word hydro, that makes me think of like, I don't know, a fire hydrant. In this case, we do use water to help digest our food, which is also a good reason why people, when they're eating something, usually have a beverage to go with it. Water being one of those, that's a good one to help digest your food. If you ate a lot of food and you're feeling super bloated, go have a big glass of water. It's going to help digest that food. It may not immediately impact and help that bloatedness, but it will help digest your food. Okay, it breaks it down into really small molecules so that the nutrients can enter the body. Man, if I'm going to eat healthy, my body better use some of these nutrients, right? I'm having a smoothie, I'm having a salad, I'm having something that has a lot of nutrients jam-packed into that. Maybe some spinach, maybe some chicken or tofu, something with protein. I want my body to break that down so that my cells can eat some of those nutrients to help fuel my body to do different cellular processes. And then, as you can see through this lovely picture with the purple arrow, the undigested material is eliminated. So those 5 steps were ingestion, digestion, the movement. So the movement I didn't really talk about. So it goes in through, for us, our mouths, it goes down our esophagus and into our stomach. And what's cool with our lab on Wednesday, we'll be able to see the digestive system of the rat. And we'll show the difference between the trachea and the esophagus. So your trachea is also known as your windpipe, which we'll talk about on Friday. So when I'm talking to you right now, my trachea is helping to inhale oxygen, exhale carbon dioxide. And my epiglottis is this kind of little gatekeeper that kind of flaps down when I take a drink of water or I eat some food. And then when I'm not eating or drinking, it opens back up so that my airways can go up and down and I can have my vocal cords and things like that. Now, we're all guilty of this, but if we're talking too much or you're laughing with your friends and you take a drink of something and it goes down the wrong pipe, right? That's kind of that, it's actually going down your trachea instead of your esophagus. Our esophagus is just, I think of it as a long tube that kind of goes to your stomach. And it's actually a little flexible, which is nice. We've also maybe been guilty of when you're really hungry, you take a really big bite of food and you didn't chew it enough and you kind of feel it go down your throat. That's kind of, that feeling that the esophagus is a little bit more flexible and it allows for smooth muscle contractions to kind of push your food down to your stomach, where your trachea doesn't have that. The trachea is very structured. It's very stiff on the outside. It actually has some striations around the outside, and that helps for protecting your windpipe. So that's a little bit about the movement. So our esophagus uses small or smooth muscle tissue, which is involuntary, which is really great. You may tell your body to pick up a glass of water and drink it, but once it goes into your mouth and down your esophagus, after that, you don't have to really tell your body what to do, which is really nice. So that's an involuntary movement. The nutrients are absorbed in step 4, and the undigested material is eliminated in step 5. Okay, so let's talk about these steps with words. If you are more of a person who likes to read to learn things as opposed to a picture. So ingestion is like the act of eating, the physical act of eating. You intake the food via your mouth, okay? This is for animals and most mammals. I can think of probably I think of like a starfish maybe that doesn't have the most, when you think of a typical mouth, other organisms like octopi and starfish, they do intake their foods through a mouth. It's just in a different location than you think. Digestion is the process of breaking down the foods into molecules small enough to absorb, okay? So this is also happening in your stomach. Your stomach has a low pH, excuse me. We know from our experiment the first week of class, if you remember back to, or maybe that was the second week of class. Second week of class, we did generic versus name brand drugs, and we simulated our stomach acid. Your stomach acid is a pH of like 2 or 3, which is fairly acidic. If you think of water or something neutral being 7. So your stomach is pretty acidic, and it's acidic so that it can help break down the food that you eat in order to absorb those nutrients. The movement is how the food is moved throughout the GI tract. GI tract stands for gastrointestinal. You've probably heard of like a gastroenterologist who does colonoscopies, and I hope I pronounced that right. I was working on that one. The absorption is the uptake of nutrients of the body's cells. So, you know, hopefully when you're eating healthy foods, that the protein is absorbed, the carbohydrates are absorbed. We want those nutrients so that our body can have energy to do the things that we think about and also the things that we don't think about. Elimination is how the undigested food is exited out the body. This is an image from your book. This is showing the human digestive system. It's showing the major organs, which are the ones you probably can think of when you think of your digestive system. So you have your mouth. It's also called your oral cavity. A cavity in your body is essentially a space in which it's held. So if you think about it, there is some space in your mouth that isn't taken up by an organ like your tongue or your teeth. So that's why it's called your oral cavity. This is the entrance to the system where food is moistened and chewed and where polysaccharide digestion starts. Polysaccharide is a word we should probably know. Polysaccharide is carbohydrate. Poly meaning many, saccharide just meaning those little rings that we talked about, those carbohydrate rings. This is where that type of digestion starts. Your pharynx, which is a little bit here below your mouth, if you're following kind of down, I'll get a pen here so I can draw. So if you're following down, this is your pharynx in here. This is the entrance to the tubular part of the system and to the respiratory system, and moves food forward by contracting sequentially. So something that I was talking about a little bit ago, which I just drew over, so I'm going to try and erase that really quick, is the epiglottis, which is not listed on here, but this is going to be your trachea down through here when we talk about your respiratory system. And this is your epiglottis right here. And it kind of works like a little bit of a dam lock system a little bit, So when I'm talking to you right now, my epiglottis is relaxed. If I were to take a drink of my water right now, my epiglottis would kind of go over the other part so that my food and water could be going through the esophagus. So this is the esophagus right here. This is the muscular, saliva moistened tube that moves food from the pharynx up here to the stomach down here. Okay, your stomach, which is down here, is what your esophagus connects your mouth. Your mouth and your stomach are connected by your esophagus. It says it's saliva moistened, which makes sense, which kind of helps the food move down that tube, okay? Think of it if it was like a water slide without any water, right? We want a little bit of water to help move the water slide along. Stomach, pretty self-explanatory. That's what most people think of when they think of digestive system. This is the muscular sac that stretches to store food, where it's taken in faster than can be processed. So if you eat a lot of food in a short period of time, your stomach does expand, which is that maybe bloat feeling that people can feel. This is also felt by different other things, different chemical reactions, but that's one of the reasons why bloating can happen is too much food was eaten in a short amount of time. Gastric fluid mixes with food and kills many pathogens. So this is really important. So food poisoning happens, right? Most of us have maybe experienced it or know somebody who's experienced food poisoning. This is where some sort of pathogen, virus, bacteria is on the food that you eat and you ingest it. Sometimes the gastric fluid, the acidity in our stomach just fights it off. Maybe it kind of feels like a little bit of indigestion, maybe some bloating, some gas, things like that, maybe some cramping. But then there's like food poisoning where your body like needs to get rid of that substance very quickly. But a lot of the time, the gastric fluid in our body can kind of kill off a lot of that bacteria. This is also in the stomach where the protein digestion occurs. Well, we've talked about the other macromolecules, and we noticed that the polysaccharide or the carbohydrates started digesting in the mouth. With that enzyme breakdown, with the saliva and things like that, protein is starting to get digested in the stomach. And it can secrete ghrelin, and it's also an appetite stimulator. So we've all felt that before too, probably, where you're maybe out and about running errands and all of a sudden you're like, I'm hungry. So what is that? Why is your body telling you that you're hungry? Maybe you kind of have a rumbly kind of feeling in your stomach, or maybe you're feeling dizzy or lightheaded. Those are those things where your body is saying, hello, my stomach is empty. You need to supply me with some food. That's an appetite stimulator. It can also work in the opposite way. Which is also why I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the book, Run Fast, Eat Slow. My dad read it. I have not read it, but I've seen it before. And it's just a theory that says you're supposed to eat a little bit slower. Now, I am not somebody who eats very slow. I love food. I will eat very fast. It's not a good habit of mine. But also your body will then tell you when it's full. If you're sitting at a restaurant and they bring you a plate of food that's this big, and you're so hungry, you're like, man, I ordered this big plate of food. Usually 3/4 of the way through, you start to feel a little full. So after that, what's going on is your stomach is filling up. It sends a chemical reaction of hormones to your brain to tell you, hey, I'm full. And then sometimes you maybe bring a box home. Or if you eat fast enough, it doesn't send that hormonal reaction to your brain in enough time. So maybe you eat the whole plate of food and then you leave the restaurant 20 minutes later and you're like, wow, I'm just too full. So that happens. So your body does try to communicate when it doesn't have enough food and when it has too much food. The small intestine then is connected to your stomach. And this is kind of what people think of when they see their intestines. It's all this jumbled mess right there that I circled. It's about 10 inches long and receives secretions from the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. It has another part. So the two parts, the duodenum and the jejunum, Those are about 3 feet long. The jejunum is 3 feet long. And this is where most of the nutrients are digested and absorbed into the body. The third part is the ileum, which is about 6 feet long, and this absorbs some nutrients, delivers unabsorbed material to the large intestine. So if we were to untangle all of our small intestine in our body, now everybody's a little bit different, this thing would be like feet long. Like this would be like 6, 7, what did it say? Probably 9.5 feet long minimum. This is a long organ, but in our body, it's kind of all folded up on itself and jumbled together. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. We've talked about surface area to volume ratio. So I know that the quickest way from point A to point B is a straight line. So why do we have a small intestine that is 9 feet long and all jumbled up into our little organ system called our digestive system? Why is it right below our stomach and it's so big? Why can't we just make a tube that just goes straight down, right? That seems more effective. Well, we know that with the surface area, when the surface area increases to the volume ratio, like we talked about with like when you go to a hibachi restaurant and they cut your steak up into little squares and then they cook it, it cooks faster. So with your small intestine, we want the nutrients to be absorbed. So when those nutrients are absorbed, the folds allow it to take its time to absorb, but also digesting it properly, okay? And also the space, right? It does work within that space as opposed to just one long tube like this, okay? We then move to our large intestine, also known as the colon. The small intestine attaches to the large intestine. The way you can tell the difference between the small and the large intestine, one, in a picture, it's by the looks. I can tell the difference because this, to me, is bigger than right from here to here. Okay, the location, the large intestine is attached to the rectum. So this is what concentrates and stores that undigested matter by absorbing mineral ions and water. It's about 5 feet long. So on top of our small intestine, we also have a large intestine that's about 5 feet long. That's incredible. It's divided into ascending, transverse, and descending. So it kind of goes ascending, transverse, and descending in that direction. I know my scribbles are kind of getting all jumbled here. And then it attaches to the rectum. This is what stimulates the expulsion of feces, which then attaches to the anus, which is the end of the system, and the terminal opening through which the feces are expelled out of the body. Okay, so those are the major organs. Now we also have some accessory organs. And remember, an accessory is something that kind of like helps you out a little bit. An accessory could be like earrings or a bracelet, or your headphones are a tech accessory, helps you out. So your salivary glands, these accessory organs, kind of secrete saliva fluid and helps to start digestion of carbohydrates and polysaccharides by using digestive enzymes, buffers, and mucus, which moistens the food and lubricates it. It's just gonna help when the esophagus wants to also move it down. So that's your salivary glands. That's an accessory organ. Your liver secretes bile, so it helps in carbohydrate, fat, and protein metabolism. So it's how we are breaking down and using carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. The joke is, you know, that, oh, my poor liver, things like that. Your liver also helps to detoxify your body. So anything that is considered a toxin that goes in your body would go through your liver as kind of like a filtration system. Your gallbladder is kind of, it's this little green marble looking thing that I just circled. It stores and concentrates the bile that the liver secretes. So it doesn't have a super important job besides that it kind of attaches to our liver and just helps it out. Your pancreas secretes enzymes that break down all the major food molecules. It secretes buffers against HCl, which is an acid, from the stomach and secretes insulin, a hormonal control of glucose metabolism. Okay, so this is starting to make a little bit more sense. If our pancreas is responsible for insulin, which helps us break down sugars and carbohydrates, if somebody who is insulin deficient would have probably some struggles with their pancreas. This is maybe also known as diabetes. There's type 1 and type 2 diabetes that are resulting of different processes, which we will talk about here in a little bit. But just know that the pancreas is in charge of that insulin, which helps us break down sugar. Okay, so what is the pathway that the food follows? So if you are food, if you are the apple that you just ate, where does it go? What's the pathway? What's the travel system? It goes mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, anus. Although I wish food would digest that fast sometimes, it doesn't, right? This is a process that can take 4-6 hours, depending on the person we're talking about, and their metabolism. So young kids digest food fairly fast, especially like an infant, like a baby. The joke is that, you know, you're always sleeping, eating, or pooping if you're a baby, right? Because your digestive system is eating soft, digestible food, or maybe milk or formula or things like that. As we get older, our metabolism slows down. So when we get into older age, it may take longer for this food to digest, maybe closer to 6 hours. Teenagers, active athletes usually have high metabolisms. Their food would take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to digest as well. All right, so when the food is in the mouth, what's going on? So our teeth are chewing that food into small particles that help to move it down the esophagus, right? If I were to just shove a whole sandwich in my mouth, that would not be very beneficial, right? My esophagus could not handle that. So our teeth break it into small particles so that our esophagus can move it down to our stomach. This ingestion also is mixed with a chemical digestion, which is the saliva. So our saliva helps with some enzymes and that chemical digestion in our mouth. Our saliva is made up of water and mucus and digestive enzymes. Some of those digestive enzymes are listed here for you. This is to help break down carbs. It wets your food and it lubricates it to move it down the esophagus. This is pretty self-explanatory, especially because we deal with this on a daily basis. So how do we swallow food? Once the food is in the pharynx, okay, so it left your mouth and now it's in the pharynx, swallowing becomes a reflex. So the word reflex, you've maybe heard before. A reflex is something that's an involuntary movement that uses muscle contractions. So it's like when you go to the doctor and you sit on the edge of the table and they use a little tool to get your patellar tendon reflex. What's happening with that is then when they hit your patellar tendon reflex, your knee will or your quadricep will contract and your foot will fling forward. You guys know what I'm talking about? So what's happening there is when they kind of hit that patellar tendon, it contracts the quadricep muscle. So when you contract your quadricep muscle and relax your hamstring muscle, it brings that leg out. Also, you can maybe do that exercise in the gym. If you have that machine, maybe at the W or things like that, where you do leg extensions. That's what's going on there. So a reflex is a muscular reaction that's involuntary. I'm not telling my leg to contract. I'm not telling my food to go down my esophagus. It's just kind of happening. The epiglottis, which is that cool word I've said a couple of times today, it covers the voice box to make sure that the food is routed into the esophagus. So this is that little kind of gatekeeper that's moving our food from our mouth, from our pharynx to our esophagus and making sure that it doesn't go down our voice box. and into our trachea. But it does happen once in a while. Oh, my computer, sorry. It does happen once in a while, right? When you take too big of a gulp of water and you need to take a breath, and sometimes your epiglottis fails, then you have to maybe a little bit of a cough or things like that. That's just when your food or drink goes down your trachea instead of your esophagus. Your food is pushed along the digestive tract by peristalsis, and then the rhythmic waves of the contraction of the smooth muscles in the wall of the digestive tract. So we've talked about smooth muscle tissue before. The opposites, or the different types of muscle tissue that we have, are cardiac muscle tissue, which is found in your heart. You have skeletal muscle tissue, which is found like in your quadriceps or in your abdominals. And then you have your smooth muscle tissue, which is found throughout the body to help with bodily functions and movement of things that we're not thinking about, that are happening involuntary. So this is another way, a little demonstration. So this is over time down the side, but picture that the food is being digested from left to right, okay? So when we're just sitting here and we're not actively swallowing food, your esophagus kind of looks like that top picture. But now that we have food in our esophagus and you swallowed some food, what's going on is the smooth muscle tissue is contracting and releasing, and it's moving the food down the esophagus. And I like this picture, although the colors are kind of weird. I just like that it shows the different arrows and how the contracting is working down the esophagus to show how the smooth muscle tissue is working together involuntarily to move that food down to your stomach. Here's another picture of how do we swallow food. This one's kind of cool because whatever this is, whatever that food was, is kind of traveling down, which I like in this picture, okay? So here we have your mouth, okay? We have your pharynx. You have your soft palate. Here's that epiglottis, which I was talking about a little bit ago, that acts like a gatekeeper. So right now, the esophagus is closed and the trachea, the airway, is open. So whoever this is can breathe normally, can talk, things like that. Now, and you can still do that while you're chewing food, right? You can breathe through your nose, sometimes through your mouth, while you're chewing food, while you're taking a drink of water. But as soon as it leaves your mouth and goes into your pharynx, it leaves that soft palate. Now the the esophagus is open. So you see this epiglottis, the larynx rises and the epiglottis covers the glottis right here. So it kind of says, nope, don't go down the voice box. And it swallows the food and goes down the esophagus. And then here's that picture, kind of like the last slide, where that smooth muscle works in a peristaltic wave and kind of moves that food through the contractions of the smooth muscle tissue down to the stomach. The lower gastroesophageal sphincter relaxes and the food enters the stomach. So then down here, the sphincter relaxes and the food goes into the stomach. So what's important about this slide? Knowing the process of how food is swallowed, okay? Understanding the importance of the epiglottis and knowing that the food is moved down by smooth muscle tissue contractions. So what's going on in our stomach now? We've got some food. We know it's going to be digested in our stomach, but we don't really think about what's going on there unless we have an issue. So what's going on is the gastric fluid is made up of hydrochloric acid. This is a pH of 2.0, and it's also made up of the enzyme pepsin. So this is a highly acidic, not a high number, but highly acidic, very acidic environment. And it helps to break things down, okay? When I think of something that's very acidic, some food can be very acidic, such as some fruit, like citrus fruit can be a little acidic. Pop or soda, depending on what you call it, is very acidic. All of these things are not as acidic as your stomach. Protein digestion begins in the stomach. So protein, you can get protein from spinach, tofu, chicken, turkey, all of those things. Protein, remember, is important for our functions. It's good for muscle recovery. A muscular sac with a granular lining. So on the inside of our stomach, you can kind of see that picture there. While this is a cartoon, it kind of has this granular look, or kind of like a wrinkled look, that is lined with mucosa or mucus that secretes this gastric fluid that's acidic. That's on the inside of your stomach. The stomach empties into the small intestine after 2 to 6 hours. So that's what I was talking about, was that that metabolic rate, or how fast was it broken down. 2 hours would be on the short end, 6 hours would be on the long end. Some different parts of your stomach that were important that I talked about was the duodenum. This was a part of our small intestine that's attached to the stomach, okay? You have the serosa, which is the outside of the stomach. The longitudinal muscle, so there's muscle tissue on your stomach, which is helping kind of with the digestion and the movement of it to the small intestine. You also have circular muscle tissue and oblique muscle tissue, and then you have submucosa and mucosa. This is just like mucus that's in your stomach that's going to help with the gastric fluid to break down that food. Here's a little bit more about that anatomy of the stomach. There's that esophagus. You have the different muscle layers, the 3 layers of muscle, and then you have a mucosa layer as well in your stomach. You have a cardiac sphincter, and then you have the pleuric sphincter. Those are the different, the kind of the beginning and the end of your stomach. And then this image up here is showing the gastric pits in mucosa. So this is kind of like right here in the stomach, or I guess right here. And it's showing how it's kind of like not a smooth surface. It is made up of smooth muscle tissues and things like that to help with the movement of the food. But these gastric pits kind of look like little peaks and valleys, essentially. So if you've ever experienced GERD or heartburn before, most of us go grab some sort of relief with a Tums or maybe a Pepto-Bismol, but this is when the acids from the stomach pass into the esophagus and you feel this acid reflux. This is considered heartburn or GERD. You can maybe kind of feel it down in your chest. That's why it's called heartburn. No, it's not actually occurring in your heart, but the bottom part of your esophagus, which kind of is by your heart, where your stomach attaches to your esophagus, if some of that acid passes into that esophagus from your stomach, you may feel that burning sensation. Remember, our stomach is very acidic, more acidic than a lot of the foods you may eat that are actually acidic. Chronic heartburn is called the gastrointestinal reflex, which is also known as GERD. Excuse me, this is a little bit more serious than heartburn. This is when you'd probably get a doctor involved. Heartburn can happen when you have like a really salty, acidic meal. Maybe you ate a lot at a restaurant or something like that, made a big meal for yourself. Heartburn is like situational. GERD is when you're having it almost every time you're eating. It can be very uncomfortable. Some of the treatments or what can be done for that is, like I said, a Tums, like an antacid. This is when you essentially put like a base or something that's neutral into your stomach to kind of relieve some of that burning sensation. That's like your Rolaids and your Tums. Tums are made up of calcium carbonates, which are a base. So you can kind of think of it like if 7 is neutral, or like a 0, okay, you can think of 7 as being 0 on the pH scale. All right, and we're down here in the 2 range, and we've got a lot of pluses down here because we're really acidic. Essentially what we want to add is something from over here, something that's in maybe the higher numbers, like a pH of 8 or 9, essentially to neutralize or make it closer to this 0 as possible. Acid reducers, such as a Xantec or a Pepsid, decrease the acid production. So this is going and telling your stomach, hey, quit producing as much acid in your stomach. And then a PPI, which is not a PPE. A PPI is a protein pump inhibitor. So this blocks acid production. So this is kind of like on the football field, if somebody's blocking so that somebody else can run. This is what's happening, except for it's blocking a protein pump. So these protein pumps are what creates acid. A proton, remember, is positively charged. And then some of those are listed there. The Nexum, the Preva acid, Prolosec, Zarigid, Acifex. If you've taken one of those and I mispronounced that, I'm sorry, but some of them I'm just not as familiar with, especially if you've never had a personal encounter with them. If you've ever heard of a gastric ulcer, this is where you have some bacteria that's in your stomach, and it's mainly, I'm not going to even try and pronounce that, but essentially like a gastric bacteria. So this is saying that there's liaisons in your stomach created by bacteria. This is that layer of mucus in the stomach. We're looking at something that's super zoomed in. This is 1 micrometer. That's what a gastric ulcer would be, is when there's some bacteria in your stomach. We talked about your small intestine a couple slides ago. We know that it's very long. This right here quotes 18 feet or 6 meters. That's incredible. There are 3 portions to your small intestine: the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. All right, and they are all located at different parts of your small intestine. So if this is your stomach, I know that's a great picture. You have your your jejunum, and then your ileum. And they're kind of like all in line with each other. The ducts from the pancreas and the gallbladder empty into the small intestine. The pancreas secretes digestive enzymes. We also know that the pancreas is in charge of insulin production to help break down sugars. Bile assists in fat digestion and is made in the liver and stored in the gallbladder. So if anybody's ever heard of somebody getting their gallbladder removed, you know that it's not it's a surgery, but it's not something that's detrimental. You wouldn't have to get your gallbladder replaced by any means. Some people get their gallbladders removed all the time. The small intestine completes most of the digestion. So this is kind of like the cleanup crew. All right, this is the time where the fats, the proteins, the carbohydrates that weren't broken down in the mouth or the stomach are finally digested. The accessory organs we talked about were the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder, just to give you a sense of where we're at. This is the duodenum of the small intestine. Here's your pancreas right here. Okay, you have your gallbladder here and your liver. Okay, the bile is what is important here and where the bile is. Okay, and we have different bile channels in your liver. Also, this is an artery and a vein, and then you have these bile channels that are green. Your small intestine is where the absorption of the digested food. It just depends on, like I said, that large surface area created by the numerous villi, like finger-like projections in the microvilli. So we talked about all the folds in your small intestine. Why it's so long, why it's so big, is so that the digested food can use the villi. They look like these small finger-like projections kind of coming off on the inside of your small intestine, and it gives this larger surface area so that we can digest the food in a proper way. Amino acids, which are found in proteins, sugars, which are found in carbohydrates, enter the capillaries, while fatty acid and glycerol enter the small lymph vessels. So this is that structure I was kind of talking about, the folds. All these folds create a large surface area that is showing that highly folded mucosa. This is on the inside of that small intestine. Here's a cartoon view of that. So when we think of our small intestine, we think of this large, long tube. On the inside of that tube, here's those finger-like projections, also known as villi or villus. We have the lacteal, which is on the inside. We have blood capillaries, which we've talked about blood capillaries before. Remember, this is the gas exchange or the nutrient exchange that are found in our small intestines. This is how we get our nutrients throughout our body. It's how, once the nutrients enter the bloodstream, we can get the nutrients to where they need to go, kind of like an airport. All right, then you have your lymphatic vessel, which is kind of that gray or green color in the middle. And you have your arterioles and your venules, which are attached to your capillaries. So I really like this picture. I think that it can help understand where those capillaries, the venules, and the veins are, even though we already talked about them. Your large intestine is made up of your ascending, transverse, and descending colon. Your ascending colon includes the appendix, which is also one of those things that can be removed and is not necessarily needed. If you've heard of anybody ever getting their appendix removed. Water and mineral ions are absorbed in the large intestine, which makes sense because if this is kind of the end of the road, we're going to make some feces here in a little bit to expel all the things that we didn't digest. Some water needs to be absorbed in order to do that. And then that undigested or the unabsorbable food is solid waste known as feces, which are stored in the rectum, the stretchable tubular region just before the anus, where the food is expelled out of the body. Here's a picture of that so you can see the ascending and descending. Luckily for us, that makes sense to me. If something's ascending and something is descending, where it's located is what it's moving to, and transverse is just traveling from one side of the colon to the other. It's attached to the rectum here on the bottom. You've maybe heard of the word cecum before, or the sigmoid colon, the external sphincter, things like that. Those are all other important parts of the large intestine, but definitely know that like the three main parts of the intestine are the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon. So there are naturally occurring bacteria in our stomach, which we've talked about in lab, especially when we talked about antibiotics. The colon houses various strands of bacteria, some of which produce various vitamins, such as vitamin K. This bacteria helps to digest our food. You've also maybe heard of some probiotics, which are often called good or helpful bacteria because they help keep your gut healthy. Lactobacillus is active yogurt cultures. So if you ever have some Greek yogurt or things like that, there are some yogurt cultures that have good bacteria in them. So when you eat it, it helps your gut health. We also talked about like kombucha. You can also take a supplement, like a probiotic or a prebiotic supplement that also can help with your gut health. Sometimes if a doctor prescribes you an antibiotic for some sort of infection, it's also good, and most of the time they will actually write it on your prescription to take some sort of supplement or eat a lot of yogurt to make sure that you're not killing off all this good bacteria in your body while taking an antibiotic, because it's possible, especially some of those more like overarching antibiotics that kill multiple types of bacteria. It's really important to make sure that we're not killing off the bacteria in our gut that keeps us healthy. What it would feel like if this bacteria was gone would be like indigestion. It can lead to constipation and things like that. Absorption summarized. So where our nutrients are absorbed and what type of nutrient is absorbed and where. So in the mouth, nothing is absorbed, which is kind of interesting to think about. Well, you think, oh, well, my saliva is absorbing some of the nutrients. Not necessarily. You're swallowing some of your saliva. In the esophagus, again, nope, none of the nutrients are absorbed. The digestion may start in the mouth, right, because of the mechanical digestion and the enzymatic digestion of the saliva, but in the mouth and the esophagus, we don't have any nutrient absorption. Once we get to the stomach, we do absorb water, glucose or sugar, different drugs and alcohol. Those are all absorbed in our stomach, which I don't know if you've ever heard of the theory. So if somebody were to take a shot of alcohol, by the time they put the shot glass back down on the counter, their body could already be feeling the effects of that. And the reason is because it's digested in the stomach and it's absorbed into the bloodstream when it hits your stomach. And so all it has to do is go through your mouth, pharynx, and esophagus, and all of a sudden it's digested. Small intestine is where we see water, glucose, amino acids, and nucleotides. So your water, self-explanatory here, you can see that the water is absorbed in your stomach, your small intestine, and your large intestine. This is just a great reminder that water is super important for your digestive health. Glucose in your small intestine, so this is sugars, carbohydrates, things like that. Your amino acids are your proteins, and your nucleic acids are helping with your DNA. Your large intestine also absorbs water. So there are some disorders of the colon and the rectum, one of them being diarrhea. You probably know of or have experienced diarrhea before. This is an increased peristalsis and failure to reabsorb water due to either an infection or a nervous stimulation. So what's happening is that your body's just on overdrive, digesting food, and it's not able to reabsorb that water. And so remember that process, we called it peristalsis. So it's just an increased movement, essentially downward. Constipation would be the opposite of that. It's where the feces are dry and hard, and this condition may be controlled with water and fiber. That's why it's also important to eat a high fiber diet. Fiber can be found in fruits and vegetables. I think of things like green beans, broccoli, oranges, apples. All of those are really good for a high fiber diet. If none of that appeals to you, you can also have fiber supplements, or fiber can also be found in some like granola bars or like a Fiber One bar. This is helping as well to kind of move things along in your digestive system. It's also important to drink a lot of water. Hemorrhoids, this is where there's an enlarged or inflamed blood vessel due to chronic constipation, pregnancy, aging, or anal intercourse. This is where preparation H can come into play and help with the anus irritation. Appendicitis, you've probably heard of someone who's had this, or maybe a movie or things like that. This is where occurrence of the pouches of mucosa from weak spots in the lining that can become infected often occur in the descending colon. This can be treated by antibiotics. Some other disorders of the colon and the rectum are irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. This is where the intestine contracts with a lot of power. It can be very forceful, very uncomfortable, but without its normal coordination. So it's not like a normal contraction that our stomach or intestine would have. And it's characterized by chronic diarrhea and abdominal pain. Inflammatory bowel disease, so IBD, is different than IBS. It's a group of inflammatory disorders such as an ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. If you've ever heard of someone who has Crohn's disease, they may also have some issues with digestion and the expulsion of feces. Polyps and cancer. So this is what we talked about. When someone, usually they recommend above the age of 50, gets their colon checked, or they have what's called a colonoscopy. And so the reason that they get it checked is because small growths can be found in the epithelial lining that can become benign or cancerous. And these, so we think of like some common cancers. Obviously, one of the common ones are in your prostate, your lungs, your breast, and your colon. All of these areas have this epithelial tissue and epithelial lining. And a lot of the times there's a lot of turnover with the cells in those areas, especially in the breast and the colon tissue, which is why mammograms are important. After, I believe, the age of 35 or 40, mammograms are important. And then getting colon checked after the age of 50, most likely annually, because every year it's important to get checked for those things. Usually when they are checking a colonoscopy, if they find a polyp, they may correct it. If they find something that's like a small growth or a cancer, they can get it checked out as well to check it in early stages. This is just a table from your book, 37.5, Summary of the Human Digestive System. I'm not going to go through a lot with this. I think that we really kind of dove deep into what each of these does, but if you're somebody who likes to keep things organized, definitely look at that table. Okay, so that's all I have from a PowerPoint standpoint. Yes, I see that somebody said soda. Oh, that's funny. I call it pop because I'm from the Midwest, but if you're not from the Midwest, a lot of people call it soda, and I guess that's okay. We could have a debate against that as well. Does anybody have any questions about the digestive system? Okay, that's totally fine. I'm gonna hit stop recording.